All right, questions from the audience. And I also wanted to put up this chart because in a sense, this, in our survey, it's almost your voice as well as to what you saw as priorities as we went into this session. Dr. Watson.
Thank you, David. A question for the assembled great minds. For the last 20 years or so, there has been a lot of education work at practitioner level on public relations evaluation. And Richard mentioned the PRE cross-industry initiative. It had everyone involved, PR Week, IPR, PRCA, everyone was involved in it. 3 or 4 years of constant activity. And yet when you go and research practitioners like I do, you still find the first question is, how do you evaluate? And then second, beneath that, there appears to be a level of ignorance and fear. And I'm just wondering what the panel thinks as to how do we get over this barrier? There seems to be a sort of self-imposed ledge or something shuts it out as if it's always too hard.
I think one of the things that I've seen is that we've probably made a mistake in trying to educate the entire PR community about everything in PR measurement. And to me, this is a specialist discipline. And one of the macro changes that I see that's happening in the public relations industry is we're starting to embrace specialization in addition to kind of the generalist tradition of PR. And so both at Weber Shandwick and at my new agency, WCG, we took an approach of having an embedded analytics function with full-time people who were doing analytics. There were some part-time people or people who were doing analytics part-time and doing traditional account work the rest of their time. But I think we made a change and it started to bear fruit in seeing this as a specialist function that happens to be part of a broader team. And so instead of trying to, in Weber Shandwick's case, educate 2,500 people, or in WCG's case, educating 200 people about analytics, we can have a core team of maybe 10% of that who really understand all of the ins and outs and the depth of this function and the types of people who would come to an event like this or other events. And then the mainstream PR practitioners need to get educated about maybe the 10 to 20% and then figure out who they can call for the rest. Because I don't think we can get everybody in the mainstream PR community to understand all they need to know about all forms of measurement, because there's a lot of specialization that's required.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that great answer is that I think the one thing we need people outside of this room to be involved in is understanding the importance of measurement and evaluation, understand building dollars into the budgets so that it can be done, but then to let the professionals do that, just as happens in, you look at some of the other industries, you don't have the chemical engineer doing the same thing as the electrical engineer, and we need to realize that this is becoming a very diverse field, this field of public relations and communication.
Richard, one more.
Just a quick response, Tom. I think from the consultancy point of view, it's also the commercial imperative. 1996, I was at Shandwick. I worked with Test Research, a Mori subsidiary. We came up with a bespoke evaluation program for Shandwick internationally. There was no money in it, so I can tell you my fellow directors went, that's lovely, I love it, I'm just going to put it in the desk drawer and ignore it. I would say the fact that the adoption's been relatively slow is because people don't see it as a commercial benefit on the consultancy side. And I think if they saw that there was money to be made out of it, they'd take it on board. If you look at how we've changed HR practices in the consultancy world over the last 25 years, they're beyond recognition because people see the value out of that. I think it's as straightforward as that, I'm afraid.
Tom, it was interesting that in the barriers and challenges question that was in this little survey, I went through all the responses, and you kept seeing terms, you used the word fear, and you kept seeing terms like fear, scared, clients don't want to know the answer. In other words, to some extent, you could argue the enemy is us being the PR field, and we've gotten along for a really long time without ever having to demonstrate value. And so when it isn't that the techniques don't exist per se, it's that we're just too scared, we, the collective, the broad we, to in fact apply them. And I would say probably a third of all the open-ended responses had some element of that idea of, people who spend money don't necessarily want to be accountable for it unless they have to be accountable for it. And we've sort of lived in the world of PR, perhaps to an extent, with that luxury for a while. Anyway, that was my editorialization, but you had a question, sir.
Florian Laszlo from Observer in Austria. We're now at the point that I think is the most important. It's money, it's the budgets, because not only PR costs money, but evaluation costs even more. And our friends, as you, David, just said, are not the people who are the ones who ordered PR because they don't want to be accountable unless somebody makes them to be accountable for it, and they don't want to know what really worked and what worked not. But the ones that want to know are the controlling people, the P counters, and those are the ones who have the bigger budgets to give to us when we can prove them that we can say where the money was spent better or worse. The problem with those controllers, and in Austria we're working, we have a working group as well, the PR agencies group, and we're working with the Controller Institute, and the problem is that those people, they don't believe us. We don't have the credibility, and we have that a credibility gap that they say, okay, this whole communication thing, we cannot really calculate it. Nothing's there that I can touch, that I can evaluate in a currency, that a controller that never had anything to do with communications can really understand. And I think the holy grail is to find some way, and this is why AVEs don't go away, because this is the thing that they understand. It's completely wrong, but at least it's something that they can hold on to, that they know from their world. And so this gap between the worlds is the problem, and how do we close the gap without just saying, okay, let's take 500,000 euros, and that's fine, wonderful, and put it in a simple AVE. I think this is the biggest problem, and I don't have a clue how to close this gap.
I think the fear and loathing of the potential for media analysis data to upset some apple carts internally is largely because we as an industry haven't done a very good job actually at explaining the business benefits of media analysis, which is kind of part of the shtick that I was putting up on the screen before, because we've been very busy ensuring that we can get the data out. I mean, a lot of us have problems with bandwidth organizationally about doing anything. You know, if you're running major programs, it's kind of hard enough just getting the data right, never mind thinking about the business benefits that clients can take away from that data. But having said that, I think from a practitioner's perspective, certainly from the work that I've been doing with Report over the years, what we've been trying to do is to move towards identifying the business problem first. So taking the actual valid metrics task force in practice is to say, what are the issues that you face in your business where media analysis could actually support your decision making? Could it help you manage your resources better? Could it help you project your communications more effectively inside your organization? There are as many different business opportunities as there are companies and functions in those companies. So I think it's part of turning ourselves away from data supplies, as I put in the chart, to providing insight based around understanding the business goals that clients have, and not simply saying, okay, well, here's half a ton of media analysis data, go run with it.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the other important skill sets, that probably in this path from researchers to more insight-driven consultants is the balance between, I call it the difference between client service and client leadership. And I think it's an important consulting skill, which is balancing, okay, well, client service is doing what the client wants you to do and telling the client what they want to hear. Client leadership is helping guide them to what they don't know or what they don't want to hear. And I think that's an important skill set that I think you find in the best consulting firms and the best agencies. And sometimes we find it with researchers, but I think researchers succeed because they're able to present data and it's kind of a mirror back to the organization. I think too often what's missing is who's the person who's then taking that data and applying it in a consulting or a planning capacity to be able to propel things forward, and having the right relationship based on trust and the history of client service to tell the client, you know what, AVEs are bad for this reason, here's the data to prove it and move that client along the path. Or, the social media data that you're looking at today, you're using the wrong types of approaches to be able to evaluate that. Here are the new approaches that you need to do based on industry standards, based on best practices, and based on the knowledge that I have. But being able to have those uncomfortable conversations, I think, are a really important part of the growth of this industry.
And thank you guys very much.